Welcome to today's session, Habits, Environment, and the Patterns That Shape Us. This is hosted by Lumena Financial Strategies, and it is a timely topic for Mental Health Awareness Month. Your host and moderator today is Allison Fleming, President of Lumena Financial Strategies. Allison is a certified financial planner practitioner, and for those of you who may be joining us for the first time, please allow me to introduce her. Allison has been a financial advisor since 1989 and serves clients in 36 states across the country. She holds a bachelor's degree in speech communication from Cal State Long Beach and believes that we must always adapt to the changing environment, remain current, and take advantage of opportunities to improve our clients' lives. Our local motto, be a long-term thinker, not a short-term worrier, serves as the cornerstone of her discussions.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to our webinar again. I'm so glad that you're here today on this beautiful Wednesday afternoon. Thank you so much, Caress, for that great introduction. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to make sure everybody is aware of our team. I know that we've got a couple of new people here on the webinar today. So just so you know who you're talking to, our Lumina Financial team is, including myself, of course, Miles Fleming, our Executive Vice President, who is our insurance specialist specifically relating to Medicare. We have Britt Stevens, our Vice President, and Peter Fink, who is our resident stock picker. We have Damian Feldman, our Client Experience Manager, who's the first person you're going to talk to if you're trying to schedule an appointment with us. We have Terry Jocelyn, our Executive Assistant and Administrative Manager here in the San Diego office. And then we have Maddie Oa, who is a Senior Administrative Assistant. She's located in our San Pedro location. Kaylee Levin, Client Care Coordinator. And Lucy Adame, who is Administrative Assistant, also up in our San Pedro location. And then, of course, the voice from the sky, as I call her, Caress Vera, Creative Director of all things webinar and materials that you might see. So just wanted to also let you know that we are licensed all over the place, and now you have been fully disclosed, as we always do. I would like to go ahead and invite Megan to join me here, turn on her camera, and join me here in the room. So, hi, Megan.
Allison,
How are you?
I'm doing really well. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Thank you for asking. So Megan, I'm so excited about our topic here today because Mental Health Awareness Month, it's been on the TV. There's been a lot of things in the news about it. And I think that people sometimes think about it in ways that are not necessarily all encompassing. They think about mental health being only like mental illness, but that's not really what we're talking about. I mean, we're not going to be touching on mental illness today. We're going to be talking about mental health and habits, right? So just so that everybody knows, so Megan and Caress have been friends for quite some time. And so that's how Megan ended up here as our speaker today, is that she has a business and is a recovery coach, also involved with Smart Recovery USA and a regional program director for or coordinator for the San Diego location of that organization. So she facilitates weekly meetings for people, and she also has spent many years just working in the area of behavioral awareness and things that relate to mental health and habits, in particular human behavior. So we're not going to be talking about clinical stuff today, right? We're all going to be just talking about conversational ideas and practical ideas that can just be used in little ways to help people improve, right, in their mental health. So why don't you just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and what drew you to this? Give us a little overview.
Oh, sure. And thanks again for having me today. I'm so excited to be here to be talking about this. So I first became interested in human behavior patterns when I was really young, but I remember a turning point in my history. It was about when I was in high school. My older brother really struggled with alcohol.
Mm,
He and we were very close, so he would confide in me, and he was just miserable. He didn't want to be drinking. He was really suffering. And so I remember this point when I just started to ask myself, why do people repeat behaviors when
mm,
they want something different?
mm,
And after that, with my brother's experience and everything, I was adamant that I would not fall into the same trap. And then,
mm,
yeah, first year in college, I found myself pretty reliant on alcohol myself.
mm,
I struggled for years, and my mother and family were very helpful in finding me support, and my path happened to cross with this psychiatrist who was able to diagnose me with ADD. So that a lot of people know about ADHD. ADD is the same thing without the outward hyperactivity piece, so it's a lot harder to peg.
Mm-hmm.
But for those who aren't familiar with ADD, I can describe it as just a lot of mental traffic. Just every day, it's like rush hour in LA in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
I was constantly overstimulated, really restless. I had trouble focusing, but that was my normal. So I didn't know that things could be different. At the same time, I was introduced to SMART. That was also a piece of, how I was addressing the struggles with alcohol. SMART recovery, as you mentioned before, it's people are very familiar with AA. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's a similar structure to AA, but the angle is you don't show up and call yourself an alcoholic because whatever brought you to that meeting is a behavior. It's not an identity. So
Interesting.
yeah, and that was really a turning point. So where the ADD diagnosis and participating in SMART and that new philosophy around my habits, I started to realize that alcohol wasn't the problem. I was trying to solve a much deeper problem with alcohol because it was a solution in some ways,
Mm-hmm.
but then that was creating some additional fallout. So that's kind of the stage I want to set to drive home the point that many behaviors start because they serve a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And over time there may be fallout and an over reliance on that behavior, but most of them make sense in context.
That's really interesting. One of the things that I'm sure you don't know is that we actually have a lot of clients that are coming in now with a diagnosis of ADD or ADHD as adults.
Mm.
And there are certain patterns and certain behaviors. And in fact, on our financial literacy hub, Caress and I are building out this mind and money section that she launched. And part of it is about the psychology of money and how people do, why people do what they do. And it's fascinating to me also having two kids that went through COVID high school, one right after the other, and what the lockdown did to the kids in terms of their coping skills. And so like this just kind of brings me forward to, it's very interesting that at your place in your career and in your professional life and your personal life, you've tied it together in this way. I think it's pretty profound, that is not an identity, that it's a behavior that it's kind of puts you in more control, I think. I feel
Oh,
like, yeah.
yep. Mhm.
Yeah. So tell me about like kind of, I know why you're here now. And so tell me a little bit more about routines and habits and like how do you connect those to what your thoughts are about that recovery and habits particularly? Because I know we're not talking about, this isn't a therapy session. We're not, diagnosing anything for anybody. It's just, informational and hopefully helpful to our audience. So
Right, absolutely. So you're absolutely right. I do want to broaden the lens. So just a step backwards, when the ADD came to the surface and I started getting involved in SMART and found this approach to what I was dealing with in a more self-empowered way, the drinking fell into the background. And as I was kind of piecing my life back together, I noticed all these replacement behaviors coming up. I was isolating a lot. I was watching a ton of TV. I can't tell you how many times I've watched every episode of The Golden Girls. Um, I
well, the Golden Girls is good.
could but sitting in front of the TV, I was really restless, so I took up the habit of sewing Christmas stockings during this time. And Caress can attest to this. She's got three hanging in her house around Christmas time.
I benefited from this.
Yeah, I noticed all these other behaviors that were way out of balance in my life. And, one would argue that, the harm from those is not quite as great, but still, I wasn't living my life well. And I started to realize that that these were comfort routines. I was finding different ways to soothe myself or meet other needs once alcohol was out of the picture. It was avoidance without realizing it. And then I recognized, oh my gosh, this is a human problem. It's not an alcoholic's problem, which that word I hate. It's not an addict's problem. It's a human problem. We all have behaviors that may not serve us in an ideal way, but they meet certain needs.
Or maybe they did and they no longer do.
Exactly. You are
Mhm.
exactly right. So, I mean, that's a really heavy start to what I hope is going to be a really light and accessible topic. So, these ideas apply to everyone, not somebody
Yeah.
just suffering from substance use or, other really, really exaggerated behaviors.
Mhm.
But so, for the purpose of this discussion, I think that maybe it would be helpful to think of addiction as an at the extreme end of this spectrum, but I'd
Mhm.
like to broaden it so the discussion is focused on, the side of the spectrum that includes problematic behavior, what we might call an unhelpful habit. And I think because these things all have very similar roots,
Mhm.
I can be sure that if we talk about unhelpful habits, that will apply to everybody in this room.
Probably.
Yeah, we're talking to folks who have helpful habits around scrolling, shopping, TV, gambling, comfort eating, isolation, procrastination is a big one. Uh,
Cleaning your house too much.
I mean, even that can go action. But at this point, I think it's also really important to clarify the spin-off from the alcohol and substance use. There are a lot of different components to these habits that include kind of biological and physical components like genetics and neurodiversity and things like that. But we want to unwind these variables a little bit and isolate the psychological and behavioral side just for the purposes of this discussion today. We're going to talk
Mhm.
about habits, routines, your environment, creating an awareness to, some of your decision-making patterns and
Mhm.
the emotional coping that might be behind some of this.
Yeah, that sounds good. So, habits I think people assume are just like routines that we choose to do. But maybe it's something, different than that. Can you talk a little bit about that, in terms of how these habits develop and they're so hard to break, right? Habits are so hard to break. And you always hear like, if you do something for 21 days in a row, it's a habit, and then you're, whatever. Well, okay. I don't know if that's true or not, but maybe you can address that a little.
People love to have numbers, so that's where a lot
Yes.
of those ideas come from. But so are habits initially conscious and then they kind of start operating in the background? The answer to that is yes and no. So your brain is constantly looking for ways to save energy and increase efficiency.
Mm,
If it has a need and it meets that need somehow, it will red flag that, whether you're aware of it or not. But repeated behaviors, they kind of become less conscious. They require less thought, less energy. They fall into the background. That's what the brain is going for. I think it might be helpful to kind of dissect a habit right now.
mhm.
Uh,
Yeah.
so there's we can boil it down to about four parts. There's the cue, there's a craving, there's the response, and then there's the reward. So the cue to any habit is it's the first step. It kind of triggers a craving. It might be an outside action, like you hear your phone give you a notification, or it might be a situation. You're sitting on your couch. Might
Mhm.
be a process. You walk into the kitchen. Or it might be an emotion or an experience like stress or boredom. So the cue, this first step, is any signal for the brain to begin this habit loop. And that sends you into a craving. And craving is kind of a charged word, but it's really just the feeling or a need driving you towards a behavior. So it might be wanting comfort or relief. It might be you wanting stimulation or distraction. it's something you want to change your emotional or physical state. So the third step is your response to that craving, the actual behavior, what we think about when we talk about habits. So this might be scrolling, this might be eating, this might be checking your phone, turning on the TV, or back to procrastinating. That's on my mind because it came up during a meeting I facilitated this morning. But your response is any action you take in response to that craving. And then the fourth and final point, this is a really important part, is the reward. So the payoff the brain receives from taking that action in response. So this could be temporary relief, comfort, pleasure. You get that distraction, reduce your stress. Maybe it's a sense of accomplishment, but that reward reinforces and teaches the brain what's worth repeating in the future.
Mhm.
So to bring this all together in like a fluid example, say your phone, you hear your phone notify you that you've got a text message. And we're kind of trained now at this point that like, oh, it's urgent. I need to look. So there's a little bit of anxiety maybe you're feeling or uncertainty because you're expecting to hear from somebody in particular. That's the craving. Then your response is to go and check the phone. The reward is you quell that discomfort. You relieve that sense of urgency and you get back to certainty. You know that you didn't just receive a message that something was off or whatever the case may be. So it kind of flows in that direction.
Mhm.
The problem here is that there's no mechanism for quality control over time. So you hit the nail on the head earlier when you said, sometimes we just do things because we're used to doing them. It's
Mhm.
absolutely right. We like comfort. So the brain prefers familiarity. So habits can stay way past their sell-by date.
I appreciate how you put that. Yeah, and it makes me think about, so Trader Joe's has these really amazing little jellies, right? They're little jelly candies, right? They're so good. And whenever I pass by Trader Joe's, I feel this need to go in and get some. And then when they're in the house, I have to eat one like every time I go this way. And then every time I go that way, I'm like, oh, jellies. I think I'll have one. I mean, they're tiny little things, right? And then I'm like, wait a minute, they're gone, and I'm not like compelled to go back and get some more right now. But the next time I go by Trader Joe's, it's like that weird, and I mean, it's a simple, stupid example, but I think it's all those things, right?
No, it's not a stupid example at all. I think that a lot of people can relate to those things. And we'll get to that, those little environmental things that kind of work.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about that then. What about the environmental things? Like, give us your input or feedback on how those environmental things. And by the way, my son just graduated from college. He's moving back home. He was in a frat. He's now back home in a different routine, struggling with trying to get, you know, back in a new routine that's an old routine, but a new routine. It's dysregulating to make that transition, right? So how can someone, I guess, reestablish a routine that is more positive for their overall life?
Okay, so I'll start with answering some of the questions about environment and really the significance of your environment in influencing your behaviors and your routine. An environment can mean a number of things. There's your physical environment, there's your social environment, and then there's what you were speaking to, the structure and routine. And we are really heavily influenced by our surroundings. So, our environment shapes our behavior before our conscious decision making even begins. So you can be, passing by Trader Joe's and you're like, I need to stop and get some of those jellies. Or that's kind of a conscious example. But how many times have you found yourself in, the grocery store and you put one of those rotisserie chickens in your cart? and then you're like, wait, how did that? It's because you smelled it, you decided you were hungry, that you weren't going to get one of those rotisserie chickens, but it just made its way into your cart because you smelled it and your brain was like, I remember that smell, I like it, I was happy after that, so put it in the cart. There's a lot of stuff working on in the background.
Mhm.
Um, and there are so many subtle environmental cues that people can go without noticing. Like you mentioned, having the jellies around it's just kind of a cue to eat them when you might not choose that otherwise.
Mhm.
Snacks on the counter in general, a phone beside your bed or by you while you're working,
Mhm.
sitting in a certain chair at a certain time of day, all these things can trigger routines more conscious than your thought, or I'm sorry, more than conscious thought does.
Interesting. Yeah. And it makes me think about too with the routine with the phone is how often do you go to the other room in the house and you go, where's my phone? Something might be happening. What's going on? And you feel like panicked, or like what happens if you leave your phone at home and you take off and go to work? It's like a cause to have a meltdown, right? Is because you don't have your phone. You have to go back. You were late to work because you forgot your phone at home. And like, I remember when we didn't have phones with us all the time. I'm that old, you know, so, you know,
And how
you
many
address that a little bit.
times do you find yourself outside of the house and you just don't feel right, and then you realize that it's because you don't have your phone, and then the anxiety goes
Yeah.
through the roof because that's something that it meets a need. It kind of
Mhm.
satisfies that. It gives you a certain level of comfort. So,
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. And I'm old enough to remember when I would actually go to school and my parents didn't know where I was in between. And
mhm.
I would go on my bike and I was by myself and I would bike a mile and a half to school and my parents never worried about me and there were no cell phones. And now if kids go out, I mean, we get anxiety if they don't have their phones. And so I think it's also a generational difference, I think, in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, I
Mhm.
kind of off topic, but not, like the routines that change over your lifetime, right?
Absolutely, because we're exposed to all these are normal environmental factors now that
Mhm.
weren't back then. So you also brought up something that I think is really important, that this transitional time that your son's going through. He's
Mhm.
coming back home and just kind of wondering what to do with himself, maybe.
Mhm.
These transitional times, like going off to college, a career change, retirement, they are massive when it comes to
Mhm.
habits. They are super disruptive and they're really layered. So not only is like structure and routine disruptive, your environment's changed. There's usually a shift in your social structure. There's an increase in the need for those comfort behaviors and for, bringing yourself back to familiarity.
Mhm.
So it's these things in the environment, like that's one layer, but then you can take it down to more chronic feelings that these situations bring up, like feelings of loneliness, depression, anxiety, uncertainty. So it's not, one event causes a feeling, but it's just kind of this low grade kind of something
Mhm.
you're dealing
Angst.
with. Mhm.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And we see that when clients retire. We have a lot of clients retiring every single year. We have a huge client base and lots of people making life transitions. They're getting married, they're having kids, they're losing parents, they're, all of a sudden retiring either voluntarily or involuntarily. And the transition during those moments, if it's well planned for, is still difficult because people who have saved really, really, really well, now it's time for them to start withdrawing from those investments that they've saved for all their life. They don't want to.
You-
It's not their habit. They're terrified of that.
you-
And it causes a lot of stress in that regard. So maybe what do we do?
Well, see, and that's such a good thing to be aware of. These times of transition, and it's not just retirement, but retirement is a huge one.
Mhm.
But these life transition, like there's even another layer to it. Oftentimes, there's like this existential shift too, where people aren't totally clear on what their purpose is, what their identity is, what like the meaning of their lives comes into question. When before they knew, they're like, I'm going to squirrel this much money away. And,
Mhm.
the point is to get that account as big as I can get it. And then suddenly there's this shift, and that's not the reason why they get up and get out of bed and go to work, and of course that it's not simply the financial gain, but other,
Sure.
reasons for
The
purpose.
purpose, the identity
Yeah.
is
So
challenged.
yeah, so when people are transitioning to retirement in different situations like that, the habits that are addressing this upper layer, like boredom and things, they can get much deeper. And it's not just a matter of what do I do with my time now? It can become a who am I? What gives my life meaning? Like what matters when the structures I know fall away? So those situations in particular are ripe for falling into those comfort routines and can be much more difficult to unpack.
So what do you do?
Oh gosh. So so this is a time when you can really think about these questions. What does give your life meaning? Not what did, but what can. What makes you feel alive? Where do you want to invest yourself at this point in your life? What matters to you? What are your values, and how at this stage, whatever stage in your life it is, can you continue to be involved in things that have you living in line with your values?
Mhm.
Um,
I think getting in line with your values and knowing what those actually are is often part of the challenge too, I would imagine, you know? Yeah.
yeah.
So can we talk for a second about structure and overall well-being, and also talking about, some of the habits that you were talking about were pretty obvious habits, like drinking or over exercising or overeating, or like obvious things, right? What about the subtle things that add or detract from somebody's life when it comes to habits and patterns and things like that? Can you unpack that a little bit?
Do you have something specific in mind when you say the more subtle behaviors or habits?
Well, just anything that isn't necessarily serving its purpose anymore. So, um, I'm just thinking, so I decide I want to lose some weight,
Mhm.
right? And so I start doing certain things to try to lose some weight. And then I've reached my goal. And yet, all of a sudden, now this exercise routine I have, or this diet routine I have, or whatever, isn't serving me anymore. But now it's a habit. Like in the beginning, it was a big thing, but now it's part of my life. And it's not necessarily, serving me to work out at that level anymore, or run that far anymore. Or like, how do you deal with that idea?
Well, some of those subtle habits that you're talking about, you're talking about something that is in our conscious minds. If you
Mm,
recognize, like, okay, this isn't
yeah.
really serving me anymore, and digging a little bit deeper for a better understanding of why it's not serving you. Because in that particular situation, that's a great one because you don't want to get rid of the habit entirely.
Right.
I'm guessing that you'd still want to stay relatively active, but you don't want to keep shedding pounds. So you start to notice what you want to keep and what you want to go. And the big warnings I have for this kind of habit change are don't go crazy too quick. These the first step really is just gathering an awareness of what it is that you're doing, what's contributing to results that you may not want, and kind of going from there without the intention to change. And then once you get a good picture of what it is that you want, what direction you want to go, really small incremental changes to help make that transition, because too much of a leap at once is not how habits stick.
So how do habits stick?
Habits, okay. So we're good. The habits that you want, we'll call them helpful habits, and then the unhelpful habits are the ones you don't want. There's a system for creating and maintaining those helpful habits, and that is to make them easy. We want to create, we talked a little bit about environment and how important that is. We want to create environments that really reduce the friction to participating in the habits that we want to see more of. And then conversely, on the other side, we want to increase the friction for the habits we want to see less of. And that's not a heavy lift in a lot of cases. I'm if you're struggling with watching too much TV, if you simply unplug it, so after you're done with it, so the next time you go to your TV, you need to plug it in to watch it, you're going to be more conscientious about just falling on the couch and turning the TV on. Just little things like that. Just increase friction where you don't want to see habits and decrease it where you really want to see habits flourish. Then there's making them rewarding. We learned in that habit cycle how that reward is such an important piece to repeat that behavior. So it doesn't need to be, a huge reward, but something that makes it satisfying to continue doing. There's also a need when we're creating new habits to make sure, like we talked about before, that they're in line with the person that we want to become.
Interesting. So just like thinking about it sort of from the outside looking in, instead of just brute force to break the habit, to try to figure out what's driving that, like what's the reward that
Mhm.
you get. It's pretty mentally straining to think about this, to be honest.
Yeah,
It's a lot, kind of a lot.
just approaching it like, okay, so I don't know why the heck I do this, but I do it for a reason. And then just approaching it like that just gives yourself a little bit of space to explore. You can be your own social experiment and just tweak little things and see how you feel. And I can't stress enough this self-reflection, it's tough. A lot of us don't know really how we feel in any given moment.
Mhm.
Building that awareness and that mindfulness is a really useful tool when you start down this path of kind of, being more attentive to your habits and making these changes.
Can we touch on that one word for a second? Because it's kind of a buzzword right now, is mindfulness. We're in Mental Health Awareness Month. Mindful things are all over, in terms of people trying to sell us stuff and mindfulness. And, you know, can you tell us a little bit more about that from your perspective as a professional? What is mindfulness and how does it help, and what is it not, you know?
So mindfulness is just as simple as it sounds. Bringing your mind into the present, just being aware of what it is that you're doing. And as we're talking about these habits, we're talking about these automatic habits that are just happening in the background. We don't give any thought to it. The practice is, bringing it into the foreground and thinking about the reasons why you act in specific ways, or just that you are acting in a specific way.
Mhm.
Instead of I'm sitting here talking to you, trying to pour water and do a million things at once, if I was being mindful about it, I would take a moment and really experience myself pouring the water, trying not to get, we can't multitask, We need to do one thing at a time and concentrate it, not be thinking about the next thing because that's where an anxious mind lives, not be thinking about what happened in the past. That's where a really depressive mind lives. So, being in the moment and thinking about the little things that we're doing each day is mindfulness. And there's all these spin-offs like, meditation and big scary words. Meditation is a scary word for me. I am not capable of sitting and just being alone with my thoughts. But I do take a walk every morning and I'm very thoughtful about hearing the steps that I take, listening to the birds as I pass by, noticing, when a neighbor's cut their lawn, doing things like that's an example of mindfulness.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So Caress knows this story. This is before her time with me in the company. But I used to have a really bad habit of my mind goes very fast and I think about a lot of things and it goes all over the place and I'm always creating stuff and I'm always thinking about what's next. And I used to have a habit of checking the clock. And the way my office was set up, it was my desk, and then I had a table, and then the door was over there, and the clock was above the door. And when I'd be sitting here talking to somebody it was when I was managing the office up in Torrance, I'd be sitting at my table, and as I was talking to this person, my mind would jump to the next thing I was supposed to be doing. So I wasn't fully present. And then I'd be checking the clock, and somewhere along the way, someone mentioned it, or I noticed myself doing it or something. I actually put a sign up right under my clock, and this big sign said, "Pay attention." And so every time I look back up there, I'd be like, "Oops, I'm not paying attention," like bring myself back. So I feel like that's a really obvious way to remind yourself to be mindful of what you're doing, right?
Exactly. Those
Maybe it
four,
takes a sign, like a big old sign,
so true. Those
old
forced
thick, you know.
those forced interruptions are what's going to just start bringing an awareness to our actions, and that creates the space for just more intention and just reevaluation.
That makes sense. Can you talk to us a little bit about how aging impacts the habits as well?
How aging in particular,
Yeah. It's just a lifelong process, right? It never stops. It
it
seems like.
absolutely is a lifelong process because, as I said before, your habits, they need to change with you. You're constantly evolving, you're going through different stages of life. Your needs are constantly evolving. So, the self-reflection, I mean, to truly live effectively and create that space that we were talking about,
Mhm.
that takes a little bit of effort.
Yeah.
That can happen in a lot of ways. It doesn't mean sitting alone in a room and thinking about, what you need to change. A
Mhm.
lot of times getting out there and socializing helps you learn more about yourself than isolating does.
Yeah. And it gets harder as you're older to keep those social connections because you lose people along the way. And my eldest client passed at 107 years of age.
Oh, wow.
And she was all alone because everybody else had gone. And so I feel like always knowing like that you can get out there and you can meet new people and you can make new friends and you can learn new things and you can change your habits
Mhm.
along the way, I think increases I don't know what they call it, elasticity of the brain. it
Mhm.
it keeps you younger, it keeps you sharper, learning new things all the time. So I think this is fantastic.
And I mean, it keeps your mood up when you're learning, you get little, I mean, not to get too far into the brain chemistry, but you get little hits of dopamine and that makes you happy and it makes you motivated to keep going. You know,
Yeah.
it's really great. Yeah.
I see somebody raised their hand here, Miss Caress.
I did because I had a question that I thought others might relate to. Well, one, I just learned that I'm in the anxious mind club. So I wrote that down. But
Okay.
it is like hard not to always think of the next thing because my brain is telling me, no, it's good. It's good. You're being efficient. Good for you. But it's like, you're right. It's not serving if you are ignoring someone right in front of you. So, as an
Pay
example.
attention, put a sign above your door.
Right, right. So I was going to say neurodivergency is something people are learning a lot more about.
Mhm.
And here's those fun numbers we all love. It's like something like 15 to 20% of the global population are neurodivergent. And so my question is, if you are that person or you know or care about someone who is, what are some very easy techniques for someone who has neurodivergency because they think differently?
Well, okay, so if they think differently, it being neurodivergent can mean so many different things. So, how about I boil it down to a few like really practical tips for habit building when you get to the action phase? Because we did establish that the awareness is the first step before we get into changing behaviors. But a few simple practical tips for changing those habits that will apply across the board and people that have certain different levels of neurodivergent, situations can apply to their behavior. One of them is called habit stacking. So something that you already have just wired into your, say, daily routine. Maybe it is brushing your teeth. If you really want to work in 5 minutes of stretching, because stretching is absolutely wonderful for the body and everything. If you couple it with something that's already a part of your day, you add that 5 minutes on to the after you've brushed your teeth, you're going to stretch and then go on with your day. That is one really easy to start way to start integrating a habit into your life. Now, another one is the 2 minute rule. Oh, Caress, I think that you're going to enjoy this one because now everybody knows you're my buddy. So I say this with love, but you've got a squirrel mind.
Oh yeah. Can agree.
Um, and so sometimes it can be very, I think that and I can relate to this too, it can be very difficult to start tasks. We like to do the things that take our attention first, and the tasks that are less desirable just find a way into the background. But if we set a timer for 2 minutes and we start on that task that we really don't want to get to, and we're going to give it 2 minutes, no more than 2 minutes, that is good practice to get over the mental hurdle of starting because Caress, you're living, oh my gosh, I got to start this project and that's going to entail this thing and this thing and this chunk of thing that's going to take me 3 hours. And of course, you don't want to start a project like that. But if you give it 2 minutes, chances are you'll get into a little bit of a groove because that starting is the hardest part often.
Mm,
And you'll give it more than 2 minutes, but that's a
I
great.
am definitely going to try
I like that.
that. Yeah. And
Nice.
so last
Love that.
question is
Yeah.
if you want to learn about smart recovery, because I did not
Yes.
know what that was until I met you.
Why don't you
Um,
share that
that
slide?
would be the
There's,
next.
yeah, Megan has a series of books. There
So
she is
smart,
with longer hair.
yeah, yeah. Smart Recovery is definitely an organization that I just pour my heart and soul into. It was, like I mentioned, it was really integral in helping me figure out my recovery from alcohol. And I've stuck with it for a lot of reasons, but it provides free confidential meetings to anybody that wants to participate. Typically, we see a lot of people that are there struggling with behaviors like substance use, gambling, eating disorders, things like that. However, there are many attendees that show up because they're particularly anxious and they want to kind of adjust their thinking or, have other unhelpful habits like that. But it's basically a community that meets, and the motto is discover the power of choice. So we really focus on the choices to choose different behaviors, to choose different ways of thinking, to kind of figure out what's behind negative feelings and unwind those and really empower a person to create the life that they want to live. There you'll see four books across the bottom of the screen there. The 4 Point Program Handbook is one that I helped edit. It is the basics of SMART. It's what just a general participant might look at. And it has a bunch of great tools that might be a great jumping off point to figure out, the direction in life you want to go, what's important to you, how you want your life to look when it's balanced, because that looks different for everybody. And then we also have meetings for family and friends or loved ones that are trying to support a person that is struggling with some type of behavior. And then there's the facilitator handbook. We are run completely by volunteer facilitators, one and have been for about 12 years now. And then the Successful Life Skills book, that is primarily for folks that are transitioning out of being incarcerated and moving into the general system, the general population. So if anybody's interested, I would love to answer any questions about SMART or habits in general, but SMART is just something that's been so meaningful to me.
That's nice. I love that. Yeah, and thank you again for taking your time to do this with us. I'm going to wrap up for today and invite our audience. If anybody has a question, go ahead and email it to Megan. Her email is up there, or send it to us and we'll forward it along. And thank you so much again for your time. I'd like to share with you our upcoming webinar next month is actually going to be our show, me and probably Britt, talking about estate planning, key concepts and common questions. We've been getting a lot of that these days. So that's going to be our next upcoming topic. We hope to see you there. And again, thank you for your time this afternoon. And Megan, thank you for your time this afternoon. Have a wonderful Wednesday afternoon and evening, and we'll see you next time. Take care.